The CISO series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
Double extortion ransomware victims soar 935%. DNA testing firm discloses a data breach, and a dark web market shuts down after a DDoS. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get the chance for some insight, opinion, and definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Pat Benoit, the VP of Global Cyber Governance, Risk, and Compliance at CBRE. Pat, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. What a great time.
All right. And of course, we want to thank our sponsor, Votiro. We'll be talking about them more in just a second. And remember, you can join us on LinkedIn Live. Just go to CISOseries.com. There's a week in review page there. You can find the link to get in on the conversation and chat along, watch along with us. Lots of fun. We've got about 20 minutes, though, so let's rock and roll and get right to it. First up here, double extortion ransomware victims soar 935%, or what I like to call scary. Researchers Group IB have a new crime trends report that shows in the second half of 2020 to the first half of 2021, a so-called unholy alliance, which isn't hyperbolic at all, of initial access brokers and ransomware as a service affiliate programs led to a surge in breaches. The number of breach victims on ransomware data leak sites went from 229 in the previous reporting period to over 2,300 in the period the report covered. The number of leak sites more than doubled to 28. Group IB warned in the report that even if victim organizations pay the ransom, their data often ends up on these sites. Not, I guess, too surprising there, but the double ransomware extortion scheme is kind of the malware du jour of this particular scourge. Pat, what do you make of this, and should companies be looking at this as the new normal?
Well, I'm surprised that they hadn't looked at it as the new normal to begin with, because it just seems to me that anybody's bought into the philosophy that there's honor among thieves has somehow missed the boat. It's everything's driven by money. Cash is king. And clearly, if they can resell it, just like we do in the commercial world, we're going to resell it again.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of I have two toddlers, and it's like, as soon as I give in once to them, they know that they can just come back and do the exact same thing, and that a tactic is very effective. Like, is this as much about, I guess, the psychology of trying to like fix things really quick, as opposed to like sound security philosophy on this?
Well, we need to get away from this idea that we can fix this by just doing stuff to be more secure. The reality is the way we fix this to some degree is we stop shaming companies that are victimized by hackers and start accepting the fact that they're criminal, they're victims of a crime, and treat them like victims of a crime. So this whole reputational damage stuff, unless they're shown to be negligent, why are we abusing companies like that?
That's a really good point. This kind of name and shame, and then that just leads. It's kind of a slippery slope then, where companies don't want to do that, and it leads to problems in and of itself.
Yep.
All right. Next up here, DNA testing firm discloses data breach affecting over 2 million people. The Ohio-based DNA Diagnostics Centers has disclosed a data breach that occurred from May through July, which impacted more than 2.1 million individuals. Hackers were able to access full names, credit and debit card numbers with CVV codes, and account passwords. The compromised database contained older backups dating between 2004 and 2012, which were not linked to active DDC systems and databases, and did not include sensitive data related to paternity, DNA, fertility, COVID-19, or anything else that you would kind of maybe fear from when you hear DNA testing firm discloses a data breach here. So this looks like a pretty standard credit card breach here, but also calling a close call with this biometric data. It's kind of like finding one mouse in your house, right? You feel like there has to be more kind of behind the walls. Is when it comes to this kind of information, that's going to be increasingly out there. Is there any way we should be thinking differently about that, Pat?
Well, I think the thing that's really called out in this story is the fact that this was older data. And at least on the surface, it would seem that we're not protecting older data as if it was real data. We're kind of saying, oh, the value's gone down, therefore, maybe we don't have to have the same level of security. And that's wholly not true. That's what retention programs are for. In fact, most of that data probably should have been wholly offline and not even accessible. Why it was, I guess we'll find out eventually.
Yeah, it's one of those ongoing stories. I know there's the saying "data is the new oil" was the hotness like 2 years ago or something like that. But
Right.
the idea that data has a life, a value life, right? And at a certain point, maybe we should be asking more seriously how long we need to hold on to this kind of stuff exactly, or holding on to it online for sure.
Well, that's the fight daily with the legal side of things, which says, oh, well, if we get in a lawsuit, we're going to have to be able to prove. And the security side is, well, A, let's not get in a lawsuit, but B, let's get rid of the stuff, and then we can just say we don't have it. And that's as much culpable deniability as anything.
Next up here, dark web market shuts down after a DDoS. On November 23rd, the operators of the Canazon dark web market announced a shutdown of operations. Canazon was one of the largest dark web markets, known for marijuana projects, cannabis, Amazon. They're very clever. This comes after the site was hit with a massive DDoS attack at the start of November. The operators apologized for the lack of transparency, but said the sudden shutdown notice was an attempt to prevent exit scams. So interesting, Pat. We talked about no honor among thieves, but at least that's the cover story for why they shut this down. Dark web markets seemingly also having to deal though with cyber attacks. Is there any kind of takeaways we can get from maybe more traditional e-commerce to take away from this?
Well, I look at that and I say, well, you have to first ask, is this a competitive attack? Is this truly a competitor attack? Or is there somebody out there that has picked up some hacking skills that's decided that this site was not virtuous, and therefore we're going to shut it down for political or ethical reasons, or whatever the case is? We don't know, but it really appears that whether it's a hacker that's a criminal or a hacker that's just a criminal from taking social status, positions, the hackers have decided they're going to start eating their own, I guess.
Yeah, although I wouldn't be surprised if we hear the reason botnets exist is because they're cheap and easy, like relatively easy to do. Like if we just heard hey, the government just used a bunch of routers, they nailed this thing, I wouldn't be that surprised if we heard about that down the line either.
The new form of script kiddie, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right, next up here, North Korea-linked Zinc Group poses as Samsung recruiters to target security firms. According to a Google Threat Horizons report, state-sponsored North Korean hackers belonging to the Zinc Group sent fake job offers to employees at South Korean security companies that sell anti-malware solutions. They used a malformed PDF claiming to be a job description for a role at Samsung. Being malformed, the recipient was not able to open the PDF, contacted the sender at Zinc. You can guess the rest. This is classic phishing 101. It's almost kind of, again, not to name and shame, but if you told the security reachers this, they would tell you this is a phishing scheme. We've been kind of covering this a lot on the show. Obviously, these kind of social engineering schemes aren't going anywhere anytime soon. But in this instance, is this just there's a value of flattering someone's vanity as an effective phishing vector?
Well, I mean, it's the age of greed, and in Texas we say we all know what we are. We're just negotiating on price, and so they saw something that looked too good. The really interesting thing about this story to me is that it wasn't just a bite at the apple, and they got hit with that. Mm-hmm. They actually came back with a phone call because they didn't get the first one to work. So they got 2 bites of the apple. They gave the hacker 2 attempts to get them. It makes no sense.
I guess this also kind of shows maybe an understanding. I don't want to speak for what South Korean business practices are like, but if you understand that kind of recruiting culture that they have there, maybe that is part of it that makes it particularly easy for phishing, even among people that seemingly should know better.
It could be. There's lots of cultural differences that we have to learn about. For example, in China, it's not unusual to do personal and business transactions on WeChat. On a personal WeChat account. So it's that's the norm. That's the culture. So.
All right. Before we move on to our next story, we want to spend a few moments and talk about our sponsor, Votiro. Your users need to access and open files to do their job. Keep them safe and productive with Votiro. With Votiro Zero Trust File Sanitization API, your users can download and use any file instantly, from PDF to Autodesk CAD, with malicious code already removed and full file usability intact. The signatureless file sanitization process happens in milliseconds without user friction. Visit Votiro.com and learn why millions of users trust Votiro to disarm billions of files each year. All right, next up here, UK government introduces PSTI bill to strengthen IoT security. A lot of acronyms. Let's dive in. The UK government has introduced the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure, or PSTI bill, in Parliament to strengthen consumers' Internet of Things devices against rising hacker intrusions. The new legislation requires IoT manufacturers, importers, and distributors to meet certain cybersecurity standards for an estimated 50 billion IoT devices expected to be in action across the globe by 2030. We've seen the UK and the EU kind of be a little bit more proactive, especially right when there was that first couple of years glut of like white label IoT devices that were just from the exact same manufacturer. But can these types of standard rulings ever hope to succeed when, a manufacturer with malicious intent, for example, could create a clean IoT device where someone gets in that supply chain, drops malware after it's already been activated? Like, how effective can these be, Pat?
Well, and that remains to be seen, but surely for me the question becomes too, who's going to set the standard, and is this going to be another fiasco, in my opinion, like privacy regulations, where we have hundreds of different places setting privacy standards and compliance requirements, and we're going to be chasing around compliance, and it's going to end up being a checkbox, and the manufacturers aren't going to do anything specific that's going to really help the security of IoT. I do applaud them for trying to be proactive. I mean, seemingly they are less attracted to. They're okay with trying to regulate business more so than in the U.S. But I don't know how that's going to work either.
I mean, there are some table stake stuff like don't hard code passwords. Like maybe that would be like, that's like a good speed bump. Like, don't do that. But like, yeah, once you get past those kind of table stake things, I think you do get into, it could be a real morass for them to deal with the long term.
Well, and we saw issues with personal responsibility for the applications too, with things like Zoom and Ring getting hammered for, why didn't you default the configurations to something that was absolutely secure instead of defaulting it to you do what you want and the user has responsibility? Well, heaven forbid the user should have responsibility, right?
Well, and also that brings a really good point of, if there's ever an IoT device that's meant for the enterprise, where there's like same thing with Zoom, where there's an expectation that this is going to be in a business environment versus used by everyone on earth simultaneously as a consumer product, that totally changes the security expectations as well too. So that's a really good point. All right, next up here, waiting on quantum encryption hacking. A new report from Booz Allen Hamilton looks at the impacts of quantum computing could have on traditionally strong encryption, specifically regarding the theft of encrypted pharmaceutical, chemical, and material science research. It's not believed that quantum computing will advance to the point to practically break the latest encryption methods until at least 2030, so we have some time to really dread this coming. But it's not the first time we've heard, quantum computing changes the game for encryption. This has, kind of been in the conversation since quantum computing hit any kind of even lab level viability. Some cybersecurity experts are already calling it Y2Q, which I just think they're nostalgic for the 90s there for doing that. But it could happen sooner than 2030, given the advances in technology. We're seeing IBM and Microsoft and everybody throwing all their hats into the quantum game. What are your thoughts on this kind of, hey, let's hold on to things that we can't crack now, but we get a quantum computer and it's theoretically becomes trivial?
Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that strategy and everything, but it bets on the fact that we're not going to have quantum encryption, and it bets on the fact that data that they have is going to still have any value at that point in time. If they've already got the data, though, the serious problem was that you got hacked to begin with, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know that encryption 8 years from now is going to significantly change that game. And then, just like any other buzzword, AI, ML, whatever you want to pick, will in 2030 they might have a prototype of quantum computing that's available, quantum decryption that's available, but will it really be widely available to even hackers at that point? I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've kind of gotten comfortable when we hear about a data breach, and we hear about them every day. It's like, okay, there was data breach, but everything was salted and hashed, so probably can't do much with it. It does change the game, but you're right. Outside of maybe like weapons research, pharmaceutical, maybe like state secret kind of stuff, for like the vast things that we see most data breaches about, I think the lifespan of that would probably run out before they can decrypt it. We'll see.
Well, I think we have an opportunity as individuals too to start learning to take care of our data from a point of view that we know it's going to be out there. So make sure that anything you put out there that you either don't care that it's out there, or you make sure that you take precautions to have data there. Simple things like using pay like Samsung Pay or Apple Pay or whatever else to code your credit card so you're not giving your real credit card out to all these devices. We should take a look at that as individuals and take some responsibility.
Next up here, Dell offers air-gapped AWS solution for ransomware. Now, AWS was at reInvent. It's been going on this week, so a lot of AWS announcements, but this one from Dell kind of caught my eye. They launched Dell EMC Power Protect Cyber Recovery, Dell keeping up with the catchy names, for AWS on the AWS Marketplace. I didn't even get to all of it before my joke. That's how convoluted that name is. Yeah. This provides an air-gapped vault to physically and logically isolate data in the event of a ransomware attack, providing a rapid recovery path. So in an attack, Dell would provide an untouched duplicate of customer data behind a secure interface protected by multi-factor authentication before establishing a physical connection to any user data. So you kind of plug into the AWS console. The cables aren't connected according to AWS or according to Dell. This is integrated into this is designed to integrate with existing AWS assets that'll automatically be deployed through the marketplace. So, the promise here is that it's seamless. You don't have to worry about any on-site replication, that kind of stuff. Sounds intriguing. I guess, Pat, what do you think about this kind of idea of, air-gapped cloud? Seems kind of antithetical when you on the face of it, but does this sound like it could work?
Well, I mean, it is very interesting. Sounds very interesting, but as you're reading through the article, you hear completely air-gapped, and then you hear through a secure interface, and you got to wonder which is it? And are you going to have to pick up the phone and call somebody off channel, out of band to say, make my data accessible? And at some point it's still going to be accessible. Now, maybe it's only for recovery, and that's better than 100% of the time. I get that. But there's a lot of questions open there.
Well, then also, my mind goes to what kind of versioning do you have on that? Because if you're replicating data that's already been hit with the ransomware, it hasn't been deployed yet, there's a lot of variables there. An interesting, what's interesting to me about ransomware these days is that we don't have a fixed procedure. There's no 100% set thing. Here's what you do. Here's exactly how you recover. It's still very much in process for so many organizations. And this is an interesting, different way than I've seen before, which is why it stood out to me.
Well, and how do you really ever know that you don't have a copy that's infected with an unknown ransomware?
Yeah, I mean, that would be
the unknown that gets us all the time.
Our Rumsfeldian phrases, always viable. Yeah. Last up here, Palo Alto Networks looks at the speed of compromise in the cloud. Researchers at the security company set up a cloud honeypot made of 320 nodes from around the world, each with multiple misconfigured instances of cloud service stalwarts, things like RDP, SSH, SMB, etc. Accounts were also configured to have default or weak passwords. The researchers found that 80% of instances were compromised within 24 hours. All had been compromised within a week. Some lasted only minutes before being found and exploited. SSH was the most commonly targeted, with each honeypot compromised 26 times a day on average. One attacker compromised 96% of Palo Alto's Postgres honeypots within a single 90-second window. Kudos to you, honeypot hacker, I guess. That number to me is astounding. What are your takes on these findings? I guess, is this surprising given what you've seen with this kind of the sheer scale of the speed of compromise on these?
Well, I'm wondering if Palo is taking notes from the federal government or something like that, in that they've run through this process of proving something out that I think everybody already knew. I mean, so what would happen if I, on the middle of a busy street, dropped a truckload full of money on the middle of the street? Do you think anybody would take it? And that's kind of what this says, is let me open up this honeypot and let's see if anybody goes after it. Well, of course they do. And they have automated scanning tools that are searching this stuff all the time. So I don't know, maybe it's just me being me, but that seems like a waste of research, in my opinion.
This does have a very PSA kind of feel to it. Listen, we're going to do this every year. We're going to post these so that if you're not doing this, one, you're probably almost certainly owned at this point. Right. Listen, awareness is good. I appreciate Palo Alto.
Love them.
Thank you. Good stuff. But yeah, I guess to me, just seeing that 90-second window, I know that they're being scanned. I know, those exist. It's like that figure to me is astounding, though, that kind of speed exists for that kind of stuff.
Oh, did you see that? We just got scanned.
Oh, well, hi. We're not a honeypot. Please don't disrupt the stream. All right. Before we get out of here, Pat, any story that kind of stood out to you? What had a strong reaction, positive or negative?
Well, a couple of them really, it just, this idea that we would trust criminals and that we would think that they would do the right thing and that they wouldn't attack each other and that they would honor their word. It just fascinates me that this keeps coming up over and over and over again in articles. I'm 2 this week. So.
All right. And before we get out of here, where can people find more about you if they're so inclined, Pat?
Well, the easiest is probably on LinkedIn. I'm there quite a bit. I think, yep, there you go. There's the link to it, and always happy to see and meet new people. And but for the vendors out there, if you approach me with a sale on the first message, you won't get nothing.
You have been warned. Well, thank you so much, Pat Benoit, VP for Global Cyber Governance, Risk, and Compliance at CBRE. We truly appreciate your time on this. And we also want to thank our sponsor, Votiro, for helping make this show possible. You can also come back next week for our Friday video chat. We've got a Friday full of live content every week here at the CISO series. Our Friday video chat is all about hacking zero trust, an hour of critical thinking of how to simplify the journey to zero trust architecture. That starts at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. They'll have a meetup right afterwards with the speakers and the fellow viewers. You can check that out. And then we'll be back right here for another episode of the Week in Review, Friday, 12:30 p.m. Pacific, 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And remember, you can get cybersecurity headlines every day, about 6 minutes, get you caught up on all of the headlines you need to know. You can get all those details at CISOseries.com. Until then, I'm Rich Straffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.